So, welcome to another episode of Moments That Could Have Changed Football Forever. My name is Peter Thornton. I'm here with my co-author, Peter Prickett.
Hi, folks.
Little way from Pete there. And our guest tonight, we're very excited to have on journalist and author, Ryan Baldi. Welcome to the show, Ryan. Great to have you on.
Thanks, guys. My pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Just for the benefit of our listener, just give us a little bit of background as to how you arrived here and what you've been up to.
Yeah, so I've been doing this for probably about a decade now. I was quite late to the old world of sports writing. I had many careers before that, but in my late 20s, I transitioned. I'm coming up to 37 now, so it's probably 8-9 years or so I've been doing it. Started as a freelancer, worked on staff at a long defunct website now. I've been freelancing again for a long while, working for the likes of The Guardian and BBC. Did some work previously with The Independent, do a lot for World Soccer magazine, which was always a big one for me. I grew up reading World Soccer as a kid. So it's always a thrill to be in those pages, 442, the likes of that. And I'm on to my, I've done 4 books now, so next one, whenever that arrives, will be the 5th. So that's pretty much what I've been up to for that.
Well, give us the titles of the book, because one's been up for awards and everything, hasn't it?
Yeah, so my first book was The Next Big Thing, which came out with Pitch Publishing, which was using the case studies of 15 players who were tipped for the top and never quite made it, interviewed each of them and looked at their different pasts and how they fell down. And the next one was The Dream Factory, which was with Polaris Publishing, which was longlisted for the William Hill Sports Book of the Year and shortlisted for the Football Book of the Year in 2021, I think. And then my 2 most recent releases came out within a week of each other, which was a strange quirk of being signed to 2 different publishers who don't communicate. So I have They Always Score, which is the story of Man United's treble, speaking to all the different players from back then, and I did over 200 interviews for that one to tell the story of the treble in more detail than it's ever been done before. And then it was a similar thing with my next book, which came out the week after, called Arsene Wenger, which was the story of Arsenal's 1998 double, but also the early years of the Wenger era and how that all kind of coalesced into this era-defining rivalry with United and all the changes that Wenger brought in, not just to Arsenal, but to the English game. And again, that was speaking with everyone from back then, all the players and coaches and stuff.
2 books coming out within a week of each other, that does make you prolific, I think, doesn't it?
It makes me mad, I think, more than anything. It wasn't the most pleasant experience. Firstly, getting them done, having such close deadlines was tricky. It wasn't the original plan. And then, it makes promotion really, really awkward as well, I'm sure. Lessons have been learned, I think.
Brilliant. Which brings us to tonight's What If, and it's a what if that isn't in our book. Tell us what your what if is, right?
Yeah, so mine is, what if Arsenal didn't appoint Arsene Wenger in 1996 to replace Bruce Rioch? What if they went in a different direction? As we were discussing off air, there were a couple of other candidates who would have been probably equally interesting and could have been just as influential in different ways. But yeah, it would have been a very different subsequent decade or so, I think, had they gone with somebody else other than Wenger when they did.
So the situation with Arsenal when Wenger is appointed is, you've got to go back a little way to get the full picture, because they are just off the back of a very successful George Graham era, 2 league titles, the famous Twin Cups of 93.
Yeah.
And then there's some controversy, which we will maybe leave alone a little bit. And suddenly Arsenal are looking for a manager. We're bringing Bruce Rioch off the back of some very impressive work at Bolton.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't work out.
Yeah, so again, this was something I spoke to a lot of the players about the Rioch era, because I was very interested in that, and that's something that I really wanted to kind of backfill in telling the story of Wenger at Arsenal. So when the George Graham era ended abruptly and in an unplanned fashion, as you mentioned, there was the whole bung scandal in, I think, was it 94? Rioch comes in for the 95 season, 95, 96, having impressed at Bolton, like you said, I think the fact that Bolton went and gave Arsenal a good game at Highbury in the Cup was a big seller as well. They saw the way he was playing football at a kind of swashbuckling style, and they liked that, and they went with him. But even at the time, David Dean floated the idea of appointing Wenger. He was the one member of the board who was really pushing for Wenger, whereas the others weren't ready to appoint what would have been at the time and what was eventually Arsenal's first non-British or Irish coach. It was a very rare thing in the top flight of English football. I think there'd only been two previously. It was Ozzy Ardiles and Joseph Venglos, and they hadn't been resounding successes at their clubs. So there was a reticence to appoint a foreign coach at that stage. So Dean essentially was overruled, and they had this year under Rioch, which wasn't as bad, I think, as people remember. I think they finished fifth. A lot of the players were fairly fond of Bruce, but he was a bit of a taskmaster from what I gather. Son of a sergeant major in the Scots Guards, very kind of regimental, and he clashed really badly with Ian Wright. And again, this was something I spoke to Wrighty with for in the book. He talks about how he handed in a transfer request because the two of them were just clashing constantly. He didn't like the way that Rioch would seem to dig him out. I think there was even a friendly game pre-season in that first season. I think they went to St Albans or something like that and hammered St Albans, but Rioch got on right at half time for his performance and not tracking runners and things like that. And he's like, I'm just trying to get match fit. It's not that deep, mate, basically. He said to him. So from the off, they didn't get along. And I think it came down to an ultimatum as he was a star striker or this manager at one point. And in the end, Rioch went into Highbury thinking he was going to witnessed the ratification of a new contract and was ended up given his walking papers, and they were going in a different direction.
It's quite interesting because he virtually disappeared really after that, didn't he? He never got near another big job, did he?
It was really strange as well because Stuart Houston was his assistant at Arsenal, and he managed Arsenal briefly in the interim after Rioch was sacked and before Wenger could take charge. Houston went to become the QPR manager, took the QPR job when it became apparent that he wasn't going to be considered for the Arsenal top job. And Rioch went to become Houston's assistant. So they swapped roles effectively, and allegedly Houston was still calling boss around the place. So he never quite got
That's
used
not
to it.
going to work, is it?
No.
No, I think the context as well of us, as you say, in the fact that there've been so few foreign managers made it a real eye-opener, and everybody else thought it was such a huge risk. If memory serves, is that the season Hullett arrived as well, or was it the season after?
Yeah. So again, well, I promise I won't keep saying, but again, it's something that I looked up in the book and got the stats behind. Like, so Hullett had come in the interim. He'd become the first, well, not the first, but he kind of broke the mold, going to Chelsea, becoming a foreign coach there, and I think that kind of eased the path for Arsenal to go that direction. But also, the number of foreign players within the league had greatly advanced in the time between them overlooking Wenger, then going back to him just over a year later. So I think there was a general kind of changing of the waves, changing of the tide in the Premier League towards embracing foreign influences on the pitch and on the sidelines that really made it an easier transition to go back to Wenger, I think.
Yeah, by any stretch, that's pivotal, isn't it? In the history of the Premier League, that appointment is pivotal. Everything sort of flows after that, doesn't it? We see a lot more foreign managers coming in, a lot more foreign players coming in. It sort of breaks that mold.
Yeah, I mean, it was only 2 or 3 years later that Chelsea put out an all foreign 11. It all happened quite quickly in the late 90s, didn't it? This influx of foreign players. I think Chelsea were driving it with their foreign legion of kind of aging Serie A players that they were bringing in at the time and filling up their squad with, adding a kind of glamour to the league. So you'd already had the Cantonars and Bergkamp was through the door at Arsenal in '95. Really influential players who were driving the game on the pitch. But yeah, you just saw a greater influx, and then I think standards off the pitch followed what had been best practice in Europe for a while, and everything started to creep up and really advance quite rapidly in the late part of the decade.
Because one of the things we touch on in the book is the European ban, and we're not long back either. I think we'd only got 2 European Cup places. Is that right? We've not got the full quota of places back, had they, at all?
Yeah, the Champions League format was different too, wasn't it? So the Champions League came in in '92 when the European Cup was rebranded. And I believe the first time it was expanded beyond 16 teams was the year that Arsenal won the league in 97-98, because United came second and qualified for the Champions League and went and won it the next year. That was over the first or second year that it included a qualification space for the second team. So the number of teams in the competition had expanded, I think, from 16 to 24. So yeah, that was something else that was coming in. This whole thing of qualifying for Europe was sorry.
The Champions League got a rack and ruin from that point, wasn't it?
Pretty much. I mean, some would say, I might agree. But yeah, I think then it all became about getting there, didn't it? It all became a race for what was the top two, and then became the top 3 or 4. That became a kind of a thing in itself, a target in itself, which it just wasn't earlier on. And I think that you can perhaps trace the kind of minimization of the domestic cups back to that sort of period too, maybe when the money of chasing the European qualification became more of an allure than the winning the League Cup or the FA Cup.
Well, without wandering off piece, just very quickly, there's a great chapter in the book by Peter where we do what if the Champions League was for champions only? And you see it, you see it reflected in that.
There's a very pivotal season that I'm sure we'll come on to, but that headlet figures in that chapter, which is 98-99, and the team that we mentioned, Dynamo Kiev, having a big role in Arsenal's season that particular year as well. But 94 to 96 period it's really quite pivotal for English football in general and the Premier League. It was a real ramping up of the quality of foreign player that came in, because it turned from just being those Serie A end of their career legends. It started to turn into, that's Mark Overmars, and at peak Mark Overmars and Emmanuel Petit, and I'm listing Arsenal players particularly here, and then those who were up and coming, Vieira and Anelka. I don't think signing young foreign players who were on the rise was really a done thing until Wenger. The only one I can think of before that that jumps into my mind is actually Jan Molby at Liverpool, because he was signed young. But that's a long, long time before, and very, very, very rare. And that first transfer window of Wenger's, really, it sets the scene.
No, absolutely. Another quicker aside on that area you mentioned as well, just kind of thought that popped into my mind, that you mentioned 94 to 96. If you look at what happened to England on the international stage in that period, so you went from missing out on qualification from 94 under Graham Taylor, playing a very kind of old-fashioned English style of football, a long ball up to the top 4-4 F2. And then in comes Venables, introducing quite a fluid formation. He was renowned as a great training ground coach who'd had continental influences himself, went and coached abroad, and brought those influences back, played wing backs and things like that were a little bit more kind of foreign to the English game at the time. And then after him, of course, Hoddle came in too and was doing similar things in terms of tactical experimentation and playing players in different roles. So you had that going on the international stage. I think there was a sort of a drift towards accepting different ideas that weren't kind of the traditional English standards. And as you mentioned, the transfer windows that Wenger oversaw in his first couple of years there were really quite revolutionary in what he was able to do on what was, I guess, still quite a lot of money for the time for some of these players. Overmars wasn't cheap. He was $7 or so million coming off the back of an ACL. So they had doubts about his fitness. But they went and got him, and he was electric. Petit again, I think was he right a similar, or was he 4.5 or was he 7?
4.5.
Yeah, 4.5. Right. Yeah.
He's an established player at the time. It's also the players who go. So he's clearing out of some very classical British game players, people like Dickov, Hillier, McGoldrick, and then that's just the first season. Paul Merson goes, which is massive, because that's going to be that's a cultural shift at the club. Yeah, that was one as well. I think that was one that took a lot of people by surprise, because Merson wasn't your typical sort of. He had a lot of flair to his game. He was a really inventive player. He was versatile. He was creative, and he could score.
Yeah,
And I
you'd think
think
he was an
Wenger,
Arsene player, wouldn't you, Paul Merson?
exactly. Yeah, but I think what it was I think Merson just got offered more money by Middlesbrough and wanted to go. I think Wenger would have been content to keep him, but Middlesbrough are spending really big. We talk about the influx of foreign players. They were one of the clubs driving it too, with the likes of Ravanelli, Juninho, Emerson, and so on. And they had money at the time. They'd just gone down. He actually went down to the old first division to join Middlesbrough, but the money on offer was so good that I think he couldn't really turn it down. And I think Arsenal got a decent fee. And I think perhaps there was a little bit of overlap, a little bit of redundancy in terms of what Merson offered alongside what Bergkamp offered too. So perhaps that was part of the thinking as well. I guess you could look at it and say that Bergkamp only really flourished after that season. He had a difficult first year and a half at Arsenal, and then really came alive for that double year. So perhaps that kind of cleared the way for him a little bit too, to take on more of the playmaking role in the final third. But yeah, and even the very first transfer window that was technically before Wenger was in charge, that first summer of '96, they knew he was coming, so they were working on getting his players, and they went and got Vieira for him and Remy Gard. So Remy Gard was kind of a lieutenant in the dressing room for him, an experienced player from France who's going to come in and be a squad player and kind of be a culture setter, is I guess what they might call it these days. And of course Vieira, just this young talent who was wasting away at AC Milan. Wenger went out and saw him. In my research, I learned that Wenger went out to see Vieira. Well, he went out to see George Weah, who'd worked with at Monaco when Weah was going to be presented with the Ballon d'Or. I guess the winter of '95, turning into '96, it would have been. And he just kind of happened upon a disconsolate, lanky French guy in the dressing room at AC Milan. Got chatting with him, said what's going on, and he was disappointed he wasn't playing. And Wenger said, just you're a good player, keep at it. And he kept his eye on him ever since then, and then went and kind of poached him from under the nose of Ajax in the summer of '96. Before, like I said, before Wenger was officially the Arsenal manager, but it was his bit of business.
We've only he's only been mentioned once sort of briefly in this conversation, but I would put the transfer of Nicolas Anelka at the top probably of any transfer that the Premier League has ever seen, in terms of they basically signed him for a bag of footballs and then sold him for what was a colossal fee.
The
performances were amazing.
Absolutely. It's in a few ways, isn't it, that he was such an impressive transfer, because it was a masterstroke of scouting. It was a masterstroke of understanding the different systems in different countries and how Arsenal could exploit the fact that PSG, there was a contract wrangle between PSG and Anelka. He wanted, I think, fresh terms. He wanted to go. He wanted more first team involvement, which he wasn't getting at the time. But he couldn't leave to join another French club. Because there would have been like compensatory wrangles and things like that. But there was a loophole in the system whereby a foreign club could come and take him for a pittance. Is basically what Arsenal did, and I think it was ended up at a tribunal that set the fee at around £500,000. And in terms of kind of scouting him, realizing what a prospect you've got, and going and getting him and exploiting the French system, that was a masterstroke in itself. Then it's a masterstroke of like integrating him and him just being a phenomenal player for Arsenal at such a young age. And then, as you said, the final point of actually selling him for a huge profit, which paid for the training ground that they went on to build and more. And one of the things that I most enjoyed about going back and watching all those old matches was just realizing what an incredible talent Anelka was. I mean, of course, I remember it at the time, but
I think it was the cup final. He was like 19, I think, when he scores. I think he scores them both, doesn't he, in the cup final? And he does it, because even then it's still the FA Cup final. And he does it like as though it's like without batting an eyelid, like it was just out for a game with his mate.
The Charity Shield as well, after they come back after the summer break, where he just destroyed Jaap Stam in his United debut.
Yeah.
And then the game again at Highbury and early in the 98-99 season, where they ripped United apart 3-0, and again he tears Stam to shreds. He was phenomenal. I spoke to Lee Dixon about it, and he was saying that him and Merson were talking in the training ground one time. He was saying this kid, Merson had played with him in the reserves first, because Vieira was kind of, Anelka was brought through the reserves first. And again, I spoke to Adrian Clark about this too, who was a reserve team player at the time. And they said he was just on a different level. You just couldn't, his pace was unreal. His touch and his finishing were just on on another worldly level. And Merson was comparing him to Ronaldo, phenomenal Brazilian Ronaldo, who was, of course, the best player in the world at that time. And you can see the comparisons in terms of the close control and the burst of speed and the finishing. Yeah, he had it all. He was an incredible player. And like I said, one of the things that just jumped out of the screen every time I went back and watched these old Arsenal games was Anelka and Vieira. Pretty much were just on a different level already at that point.
So one of the books that you wrote and obviously famous for is entitled Arsene Who. Who was the actual first person? Who was the one that quoted that?
That was it was in all of this. Yeah. So it's often thought that the Evening Standard printed it as a headline on the back page, but they didn't. What it really was a bill poster around the city when the rumours were gathering pace that Wenger was coming in. It was Arsene Who they put on their bill posters. There was an article in the Daily Star that had Arsenal Who as the headline as well, and in the Evening Standard itself, in the actual paper that was being advertised on as bill posters, they had a pronunciation guide for how to say it. Of course, it's part of the English football lexicon now. We know it's Wenger with the Germanic V for a W at the beginning. But they were saying it shouldn't be pronounced Wenger or Wenger, as you might think. We're at a typical French pronunciation. He's from Alsace. He's from this region of France. It's close to the German border, and it should be pronounced with a V, a Germanic V sound. So yeah, it was quite an interesting thing to go back and research and look at all those old newspaper clippings and see just how, because he'd been manager of Monaco. I know that Japan was his last outpost. He'd been at Nagoya Grand Prix, but before that he'd been Monaco manager and a successful Monaco manager, reaching a European final, took them to a league title there. We're in the modern era. I think most football fans would be aware of who he was, but it was just such a different time. There was no social media. There was there's no highlights program of French football or anything like that. So we knew a little bit about Serie A from Gazzetta Football Italia. We knew perhaps even a little bit about La Liga with Sky starting to introduce it in the late 90s, I think. But French football was still off the radar. So he was almost a complete unknown, despite the fact that he had a pretty decent background to him.
So if we do the fantasy side of it, what's your view on what happens if Arsene doesn't come in? Who do they get?
So that's interesting. So as we were discussing, there are a couple of names who were mentioned most regularly in the press at the time. Wenger was one who was treated with bemusement, as I said. The other two were Terry Venables, who was just coming off managing England at Euro 96. So he would have been a big name appointment, but there was obviously some concern among Arsenal fans about appointing a former Spurs man. But yeah, he was one of the big names mentioned. Johan Cruyff was the bookie's favourite for a long time, who just come off the back of the Barcelona dream team. So yeah, he just finished up at Barcelona in '96, and he was the name that was most often linked, and I think thought to be the most likely man through the door at that point.
So with Cruyff, they would have just 96. They just won 4 straight.
Yeah, that was 90 to 94, wasn't it? The 4 straight. 91 to 94 was the 4th title.
And then he stayed on for another couple of seasons.
So there's the 2 down years where Madrid had kind of gone back ahead of them. Then he left in 96. Yeah,
but that Barcelona side, I think, was never quite the same after the AC Milan Cup final.
Yeah,
where Milan destroyed them 4-0, which no one saw coming. Mm-hmm. No one saw coming at all. And Cruyff never manages again. Which is a
bizarre turn to it all, considering he was in the running for such a big job, such a high potential club who were obviously on the cusp of being able to achieve some big things with the right backing and with a good coach coming in. So yeah, it's fascinating that he never dipped his toe back in it after that.
I think it's really interesting as well if you have a look, because we touched on it earlier, but yeah, you have a look at the list of managers in the Premier League at the time. It's like an A to Z of like classic British managers, isn't it? Jim Smith's still in there at Derby, isn't it? Peter Reid's still in there. And the impact that Cruyff would have had, but you didn't get the speculation like you've touched on about everyone managing a big European club coming, because I think Louis is in charge of Ajax, isn't he?
Yeah, he would have been at the time.
Louis in charge of Ajax. That'd have been an interesting one as well, wouldn't it? But he was, obviously never mentioned.
Yeah, which is a funny one. You think any big job that he would, because he just taken Ajax to back-to-back finals, Champions League finals, and he won in '95, and then in '96 they lost to Juventus on penalties, wasn't it? So yeah, you'd have thought he'd have been right up there. What is it? '98 he went to Barcelona. '97 he went to Barcelona in the end. So it was kind of in that interim period between those two jobs. But yeah, he'd have been one of the big ones on the continent.
I think that's what
today.
That's what sort of fascinates me about Arsene, is that he didn't just change the style of football on the pitch. It was the complete culture change off the pitch, and the way players, refueled and all that sort of thing that he's taken for granted today, that really did change English football, didn't it?
Oh, massively. Yeah, no, for sure. That's what all the players spoke about as well. More than any of the work he did tactically or on the training pitch itself. He wasn't especially hands-on in that regard, by all accounts. But in terms of like the term I mentioned earlier, which is kind of one of the buzzwords of sport at the moment, setting the culture. He certainly did that. He introduced stretching, which was an alien concept for some of these players. Pilates routines early in the morning. One of the first kind of scenes I tried to paint of the Wenger period in charge is that first game he had away at Blackburn. He instructs the players to wake up at 8 o'clock and meet him in a conference room downstairs. And when the players get there, he's cleared out a space. All the chairs have been pushed to one side. He's cleared out a space in the middle. He's there wearing his hot pants, 80s short shorts and a tight t-shirt. And he's going to take them through a stretching routine that's going to become their standard pre-match routine from now. They're going to get up early, come down. They're going to have a stretch. They're going to go for a stroll. They're not going to have egg and chips or something before games. They're going to be eating the right things. He's going to work with dietitians. They have vitamin supplements. They have B12 injections. They have creatine is one of the famous things they're offered to aid endurance. At halftime, they get caffeine on sugar cubes. And then on the bus back from Blackburn as well, because it had been the case that the players would like to enjoy a bit of chocolate before a game, or even at halftime, to kind of give them a bit of a sugar burst. But that was something Wenger did away with, because he didn't believe in what he called quick sugars. He wanted something with more of a sustained release of energy to carry through the game. But on the way back from the game, even though they won and played well and got their first result under Wenger, the players at the back of the bus were all chanting, "We want our Mars bars back." So there was a slight mutiny going on the bus home. That's all part of what he ushered in. From what I gather, in terms of the day-to-day training, he was around, he was involved. There was a lot of kind of plyometrics and things like that, a lot of exercises aimed at improving agility and athleticism and strength, and incorporating those with the football work. But Boro Primorac, his assistant, kind of a name not often brought up in terms of being an important figure in the Wenger era, but he was his right-hand man. He brought him in from France. He'd been a coach in France, I think at Valenciennes, and then he coached in Japan. He came over to join Wenger as well, and he was the one who would often lead the sessions in training and take on a lot of the day-to-day training work, similar to what Ferguson was like, I guess, at United, where he delegate that aspect. So yeah, that was all part of a kind of wholesale revolution. And
I always think, the big incident at Old Trafford where the players had a bit of a set to after the game, and there was the famous pizza throwing incident. And the first time I heard that, I thought, had to come out of the United dressing room, that, didn't it? Arsene wouldn't have had pizza in the Arsenal dressing room.
Well, yeah, that's what it was. United had put it on for them. Actually, it's quite funny. I did some work on a 442 article. They just had a big feature about Alex Ferguson in the latest magazine, and I did some of the reporting. I didn't write the piece, but I did some of the reporting and the interview, and I spoke to Albert Morgan, the old kitman, about that very incident. And the piece was something they'd lay on, the United would lay on for the away team, and someone lobbed one. They had this brawl in the tunnel. Someone lobbed the pizza. I think it's alleged to have been Cesc Fabregas who did it, but I didn't get that confirmed. And it landed on Ferguson's shirt, and it went all over him. And he had to wear Albert Morgan's shirt to the press conference because he couldn't go out. His white shirt was covered in tomato and cheese. Yeah.
What if the Munich air crash had never happened?
What if Michael Owen had stayed fit?
What if Ajax never sold?
These are just some of the things discussed in a brand new book,
moments that could have changed football forever. Every what-if moment in the book has been chosen to spark debate. Buy your copy now online at Amazon or Waterstones.
Troublemaker Cesc, remember he had that incident with Mark Hughes on the sideline as well a few years later about the medals. Anyway, we've still got the tasty treat of Johan Cruyff looming, but all of this information and detail on the change of diet, the change of routine, and how new it was to English football, is it a fair assumption to say that that is part of why Wenger was able to make such a big impact so quickly? Because they're winning a double in this second full season. And then also, is it that what gave him the edge at the beginning, everyone eventually caught up on, and he had to try and find a different edge and never quite got that back, say, after about 2008?
Yeah, that's probably a fair assessment. I mean, he didn't win a title again after 2004, did he, after the Invincibles year? He only won 3 titles in, was it 22 years he ended up there? So, yeah, and I think it did give him an edge at first. When I spoke to the players, one of the interesting things about that squad is why I was so fascinated to dig into the story of it, is because this was an Arsenal team that kind of spanned 2 different incarnations, 2 generations. There's still the George Graham back 5, and the old guard was still there. There was still Tony Adams, who that very kind of month that Wenger walked through the door, who spoke openly about his alcoholism, was dealing with that and going through Alcoholics Anonymous and all sorts of things like that. You had Dixon, Bold, Winterburn, Keown, and David Seaman as the old rear guard that he left in place. He could have tinkered with. One of the interesting things was that Wenger was long a 4-4-2 aficionado, but under Bruce Rioch, Arsenal had been playing a back 5 with Dixon and Winterburn as the wing backs. And he wanted to come in and change it, but it was a kind of concession to that old back 5 that he wouldn't do that straight away. He did it. There was one game that he wasn't even officially in charge of. It was away to Borussia Mönchengladbach in the Europa League now, the UEFA Cup then. And they lost. They got knocked out. But he came into the dressing room at half time. It was a game that Pat Rice was technically in charge of as the interim manager at the time. And he changed their back 5 to a back 4 at half time, and it didn't really work. And it really put Adams' nose out of joint. They had a meeting at the training ground on Wenger's first day. They sat on a bench overlooking the pitches and had a bit of a heart to heart. And Adams said, that pissed me off, the way you came in and tinkered when that wasn't your place to do so. So things are working out pretty well here, especially on a defensive end for us. You shouldn't have done that. And Wenger took it on board. He was one who wasn't. He never sought conflict. He kind of would go out of his way to avoid conflict on most levels. So he made that concession to the old timers, and they appreciated that. And then equally, when it came to the nutritional and the fitness regime he introduced, he made concessions for them then to help them get them on side. So Nigel Winterburn didn't like taking the creatine. A few of them saw that Bergkamp wouldn't take it, so they wouldn't take it either. It wasn't good enough for Dennis. It wasn't good enough for them. So he kind of let that slide. And also, they didn't like getting up early on the away trips to go and do their stretching. So a few of them got together and asked Tony Adams to go and knock on the manager's door and said, we don't mind doing these things, but can we do it at 10 o'clock rather than at 8 o'clock? And we said, okay, that's fine. So that all kind of helped get them on side, as well as pay rises for some of them too. So I think, so Dennis Bergkamp came in and was the highest paid player at the club. And I think at the time, Tony Adams had a parity clause. So his wages went up in accordance with that. But when Wenger came in and looked at the books, he saw that the likes of Dixon and Winterburn were underpaid versus what was becoming the norm for the Premier League in that era. So he brought them in, and without them being on expiring deals or anything like that, without them being due contract renewals, he gave them pay rises and apologized for them for being underpaid for so long. And again, that was another thing that helped get that buy-in from the old guard. So that was all part of what helped him become successful quickly. I think the way he got buy-in to these methods, not just the fact that he introduced them, but he got them on board. Yeah.
So, given that we've got this, what if Arsene doesn't come? Do you think Cruyff? Should we go with Cruyff and say Cruyff does come? Is that the fantasy side of it?
How do we think a 3 diamond free would go down in the mid-90s Premier League?
That would have been fascinating. It's also kind of a interesting thought experiment to think like who would have fit into that and who wouldn't. So like I said, they've been playing wing backs. They'd had a back three. They have their 3 centre halves, but what happens to Dixon and Winterburn? Do they become the outside centre backs like a Reisiger did for Ajax and Van Gaal for instance? Where is that kind of hybrid role, or do they kind of just disappear and they don't have roles anymore?
I think one of the interesting we do it in the book where we did like what if Brian Clough manages England, and then you're trying to guess the players that Brian would have brought, but it's really interesting to try and guess the players Cruyff would have bought, as Pete says, to fit in that system, and which are the sort of the Arsenal legends, because would Dennis have come?
Well, Dennis was there, and he had Dennis at Ajax as well, which was another interesting thing.
Don't forget Rioch signed Bergkamp, don't you?
I think I'm right in saying it was Cruyff who made Bergkamp a 10 as well. He'd been a winger, and it was Cruyff who kind of reimagined him as a 10 in that very system. So it would have been perhaps it would have been even better for Bergkamp. He perhaps would have peaked even sooner than he did. Because it was kind of another year or so before Bergkamp became, pretty much indisputably the best player in the league for a little while there. He'd have been tailor-made for that. I think Ian Wright would have fit pretty well as one of the strikers. But who goes alongside? And they had John Hartson at the time, who was someone who was there and playing, but eventually left for West Ham. Another case of kind of getting an offer that was too good to refuse. They had Paul Merson, who could have played that role. But again, is there some redundancy with what you'd be doing with Bergkamp at the point of the diamond?
What year does he sign Henry? Sorry, I was going to say, what year does he sign Henry?
Henry is 99. He replaces Anelka. David Platt as well. He came in 95, the Rioch year as well. So Platty was there. He would have been a good experience. He'd have
been a good player in the diamond.
He would. Yeah, it would have suited him, I think, to play as part of that 3 as well at that stage of his career.
Who might Johan have brought with him from Barca?
Maybe Guardiola. You think someone to play that pivot?
That's where I was going with it, because you think that might have been really
a difficult one to get, because he was the captain, wasn't he? So
very difficult. When did Chelsea were able to get? Was it Albert Ferrer?
Albert Ferrer, the right back, yeah.
So I think Arsenal, if Cruyff goes to Arsenal, they would be able to bring him in, and he could be one of the outside backs. The other thing that happens around this time, which would tie in interestingly with Cruyff coming, is the Ajax team starts to be taken apart. The Ajax team that reaches 2 consecutive cups. So the De Boer brothers could be an option. If especially Ronald was willing to go to Rangers, if he's willing to go to Rangers, there's every chance he's willing to come to Arsenal. So you could see Cruyff trying to get a couple of players from Barcelona, and maybe not having a great deal of success. Maybe get Ferrer in, and that might be about it. But you could see him being able to grab a couple of players from Ajax for this team.
And they would have been playing there anyway.
The other thing I think is really interesting is you can't imagine Johan getting up Fergie's nose like Arsene clearly did. Can you?
Yeah,
there's sort of big respect with Johan.
I think it would. Yeah, it'd be more from Fergie's side. I think there'd have been more of an instant respect for Cruyff, wouldn't they? That Fergie perhaps wouldn't have tested as much. I think Fergie really bristled at the fact that this quote-unquote unknown manager was coming across and being lauded as a genius. He had that famous quote, didn't he? He said, they say he speaks 5 languages. Well, I've got a 14-year-old kid from the Ivory Coast who speaks 5 languages. He really bristled at the notion that Wenger was perceived as being professorial, being highly intelligent. Whereas he
bristled at all the new stuff, didn't he? He bristled at all the new stuff that Arsene brought in.
I think he didn't. It did, and I don't think he appreciated the rush to credit Wenger with all these innovations when he'd been there and kind of was driving the league.
In '96, Fergie isn't one of the greatest of all. He's not one of the greatest of all time.
No.
He's won he's won a good number of leagues. I think he's got 4 in the bag.
So yeah, 93, 94, and 96. You have 3, 2 doubles.
So he's done 2 doubles, 3 titles, exceptional stuff. But he's still ranking below Clough, Paisley, Redding, perhaps.
Still not got the European Cup. Not really sniffed it either.
Yeah.
I think it was perhaps a bit of protectionism as well. Like you said, he had the throne, but it wasn't undisputably his at that stage. So perhaps it was protectionism.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that as well. I can remember distinctly, the treble winning season. So Arsenal do the double, and you can say that fired Fergie to do the treble. But I can remember we were working at Alexander Palace on a big job, and the coach was going to take us back to Manchester, and we made the coach wait till the United Arsenal semi-final in the FA Cup had finished.
Yeah, what a game.
The famous Ryan Giggs goal. But again, it's one of those, if you watch that again, Arsenal should have won.
Yeah, they should have done another double, really. Yeah.
Arsenal, yes. So Arsenal that season, and I think everyone is aware of Patrick Vieira giving the ball to Ryan Giggs. So and Giggs then producing a fantastic goal.
It's Nelson Vivas to blame.
But it's the save as well, isn't it? They miss a penalty.
Then we've got the penalty. We've got the Bergkamp penalty, save from Schmeichel. But what I think people often forget is the previous season, Arsenal won the league with 78 points. They get 78 points again, and United win the title by a single point.
And they dropped points away at Leeds, and this is a game that the players will speak about. Because I was doing the United book at the same time, I was speaking to the Arsenal players about the 99 season, speaking to the United players about the 98 season, getting their views and their memories of what it was like to be on the losing end as well. So the Arsenal players all remember that game against Leeds where they dropped points late in the season. I think that I can't remember if it was a draw or it was a 1-0 defeat. It was Hasselbank scored a diving header at the back post, and Nelson Vivas, who'd been a new signing that January, had come on. He was a right back. They brought him on at left back, and he lost his marker. He lost Hasselbank at the far post, and he's the one that kind of still is the figure of blame for them not winning the title that year because they lost those points and he never really recovered. So that's another kind of sliding doors moment. Yeah, and, I think I don't have the numbers in front of me, but for some reason they really scored to score goals that year, Arsenal. I think their goals production really went down, despite the fact that Anelka was flying. I think maybe, I don't know if there were injuries or something, but they weren't quite as prolific, and I think that's probably their downfall that year. Ian Wright had gone, of course, as well. But
Wright has gone, I think that's the thing. Ian Wright has gone, and that prompts the, we don't know for definite, but that prompts the Thierry Henry signing the next season. Yeah, I've just got it in front of me. Arsenal only scored 59 league goals that season.
It's quite funny as well. You're just saying there, United won it with 78 and Arsenal won it with 77 or whatever. And you think about the totals that win it now. Yeah. It's like, what's going on? Again, it's quite interesting. I worked on the United Museum, the treble winning season for United's museum. And what they were all talking about then was that momentum thing. Yeah. Where all of a sudden, no one was talking about it at all until right at the end, and then there was that. I think they always talked about the game against Juventus. Yeah, that was kind of the point where they thought, okay, and then it was like, ooh, we're on.
In my research, I kind of traced it in the media as well for the book. I was looking up the word treble, basically searching newspaper archives for the word treble, and when it was mentioned. It was mentioned in the Manchester Evening News in late January. That was the first I could see it mentioned, but I spoke to the players about it, and they said, no, we weren't thinking about it. For quite a long time, it was like, we're obviously we're going to do what we can. They had their last defeat was on, I think it was Boxing Day against Middlesbrough at home. The game Fergie missed because he was at a funeral for his sister-in-law. Jimmy Ryan and Eric Harrison took charge because Brian Kidd had left as well, and it was before Steve McLaren came in. So Jimmy Ryan had been promoted from youth reserve team manager to be Fergie's number 2 temporarily. He took charge of that game, and they got Eric Harrison, the old youth team coach, out of retirement to be another voice in the dressing room because he was familiar with a lot of those players and they
Oh,
feared him
lads,
as much
yeah.
as they feared Fergie.
Yeah.
So yeah, they lost that game 3-2. They were 3-0 down at halftime, almost came back, we lost it. And they didn't lose again for the rest of that season. They built that momentum. That was something I talked about a lot with all of the players. Talked about the what it's like, what it feels like to be on that role. And in terms of the word, the treble itself, Dwight York was the only one who was speaking about it, and kind of in a joking fashion, in typical Yorkie fashion. He was after every game, he had a countdown going. So he's all right, lads, only 17 more wins to go, and then we've got the treble. And everyone would kind of just laugh it off. So that's Yorkie being Yorkie. That's kind of what he brought off the field that year. Was that it was a very serious place a lot of the time around Old Trafford and the Cliff, and Yorkie just lightened the mood by all accounts. But obviously, as well as being phenomenal on the pitch and scoring lots of really important goals. But yeah, as it got closer and closer, I think, like you said, that Juventus game away, and then the game against Arsenal, the FA Cup replay, were the ones where, okay, it's really in view now, and this is something we're going to kind of lock in on.
In the Champions League that season, Arsenal are in it as the defending champions. Manchester United are in the second place. And no one thinks about Arsenal as being anywhere near that Champions League that season. However, if you look at the group, they are cruising through after 3 games, and they then lose in Kiev, which links back to our book, and we suggest that season, if it was champions only that season, Dynamo Kiev might well have been European champions.
Yes, because Bayern weren't, were they? Bayern weren't champions.
Incredible side. But Arsenal then lose at home to
Lens, yeah.
And that knocks them out.
Yeah.
And it should do as well.
They were playing at Wembley at the time as well. Was that the year they were at Wembley? Or was that the year after? Because I remember, obviously, it wasn't this year they played Fiorentina, but I have quite a vivid memory of Batistuta smashing one past Seaman at Wembley. They played at the old Wembley for a couple of years because Highbury was.
Yeah, they did play at Wembley that season. Yes. Yeah, and they're going through until they lose at Lom. If they just get a point, they can still beat Panathinaikos in the last game, which they do. And they're through, but it doesn't work out that way.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It has so many continental players, but it struggled on the continent for most of Wenger's time, really. I mean, they got to the final in 2006, didn't they? But they were kind of underdogs in doing that, and the way they knocked out Real Madrid, and then nobody really expected them to beat Barcelona in the final. Barcelona with Ronaldinho and Xavi and Eto'o, and they gave them a good game, but fell short. So yeah, it's a funny kind of thing that they were so good domestically and always challenging United in that early Wenger period, but we're kind of still so far away in the Champions League.
One of the ones that we have in the book is what if the ref got it right, and there's the famous one where Van Persie gets sent off in Barcelona.
Yeah,
and because obviously we researched it, and if you watch that, it's almost like the distance between the sound of the kick and the sound of the whistle is like minuscule. It's almost like the referee was pre-programmed as though he knew he was going to do it. Do you know what I mean? And you really you still look at that game and think, they only wanted one more goal and they'd have probably knocked Barca out. And our conclusion in the book is it's not that Arsenal win, it's that United win it.
Right. Okay.
United, because United play Barca in the final, but it's United that finish up winning it because
they're a better team than Arsenal.
Yeah, I think Arsenal bump into someone really big in the other semi-final. Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but and they've probably got knocked out. But so United play somebody in the final, and United get another European Cup, which is always the type of things we like in the book. Where it's not just that happens and then that happens. It's like a great
different knock-on effects. Yeah.
Barcelona.
Go on. Sorry, Pete.
I was say Barcelona brings us back to Cruyff, and we talk about the seismic changes Wenger made culturally, but in terms of style of play, I mentioned that 3-diamond-3 style of play, but no one in English football would have been playing in the manner that Cruyff did. And then you compare to now, where everyone says there's all these videos of teams like Gateshead playing out from the back and saying Pep was changing English football. But to have Cruyff come in and play in that way, the impact stylistically could have been even more seismic.
Yeah, what's interesting as well is to think about how well his messaging would or wouldn't have gotten across. As I mentioned, the lengths Wenger went to get the players on side and get them all kind of pulling in the right direction. One of the things that the players mentioned as well, I spoke about how, I spoke to fans about when did you notice the style of play changing. It was quite early on. There was a game against Spurs. I think they won 3-1. They said, okay, we're playing a swashbuckling style now. This is not the Graham era anymore, even though a lot of the same players are there. And speaking to the players, I tried to get to the bottom of how he did it. What was he doing on a trainer? I was like, specifically, what did he do? What was he telling you to do? And there wasn't anything. It was just, they kept saying it was a feeling. He was kind of emboldening them to express themselves. It sounds very wishy-washy, but that's what they felt. They felt emboldened to play football. People like Lee Dixon, who were told to, keep it simple. If in doubt, kick it out. Follow your marker, track your runner. Don't go wandering off too far. He was kind of emboldened to go and play. And
from a coaching perspective, for me, it's in that regard, it's what you don't say that has the impact.
Yeah,
not telling them they've made a mistake by kicking it out, not scolding them for trying to play. That has even more of an impact than actually telling them try and do this. Not speaking.
That's what I wonder about Cruyff. It would have been a much more dictatorial approach, wouldn't it? It would have been, this is where you need to be. This is what you need to do. These are your options. Do not stray from them. Whereas, Wenger, he introduced this amazing style of play that everyone loved. It became everyone's favorite second team for a while there. Partly because most people didn't like United too much, but also because of the style, because of the style that that Arsenal were playing with for so many years. It was a hallmark of the Wenger era. They played this beautiful passing football. But I was fascinated to learn that there was no it wasn't an instructive style of play. He wasn't prescribing any kind of great method. It was all about a feeling he imbued these players with, and just filled his team with good players who could do it, whether they believed they could or not. That was what he was going to get out of them. So whether these same players would have been able to unlock that feeling with Cruyff in charge, or whether they would have been able to fulfill his demands to his expectations, is something that's interesting to think about in that era as well. Whether this squad, whether the English game in that era was ready for Cruyff, essentially.
Well, that 3-diamond-3, if you have, it's difficult to think of any team from that era that wasn't playing 4-4-2.
Yeah.
You just look at that. Who was, perhaps
there was it's in that era. There's a few ventures with the wing backs. Liverpool played it under Roy Evans. Villa played it. Martin O'Neill used it at Leicester. There's a few who play wing backs, but the 3-diamond-3 it's not even wing backs. There's no wing backs. It's completely narrow, and you could imagine the people on commentary or the fans in the stadium going, I don't even know who would be playing on that side. David Platt's playing wing back. He's playing really narrow as a wing back. He's playing central midfield. You can just see the culture shock that would have occurred.
Yeah, you can just imagine the pre-match graphics would have taken a while to catch up. They would have been wrong for a long time, wouldn't they? They'd have been, okay, we know it's a back three, but what are those two doing there? And who's out? Someone's got to be out wide, but back.
Absolutely,
It would have taken a while for them to really catch on, I think.
You see, I think the one thing that I would put my house on is that Johan wouldn't have stayed as long as Arsene.
Oh, yeah.
Would he? What do you think? 4 or 5 years, perhaps?
Yeah, he did 8 at Barcelona in the end, didn't he? But it had there was a downturn. Yeah, I mean, of course there was for Wenger. It was a huge and drawn out downturn, I guess. But yeah, I think he might have, interestingly though, kind of driven the same structural change, infrastructural change that the Wenger did, or similar anyway. Pushing for a new training ground and things like that, and improving facilities. I think he would have had a similar effect in that regard. But I don't think he'd have been there anywhere near as long. I think there'd have been callings elsewhere.
I guess there's a deeper question there, though. You talk about if Cruyff's in England at that time, impacting a club head to toe. What does that do to youth development in England? Because you then got the Dutch methodology, the Ajax methodology, brought in many years before I think it was realistically really considered. Maybe at least half a decade before they start touching on it, playing 4v4 in training a lot of 4v4s, a lot of small-sided games, you're talking about a leap in player development.
And it coincided as well. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but it coincided with Howard Wilkinson's review of youth football in England in the Charter for Equality in 1997. So that was It would have gone hand in hand. I've spoken to Wilkinson about this for the Dream Factory, and he talks about how he went and watched Ajax. He studied what they were doing in Sao Paulo. He looked all over when he was pulling together different methodologies and things to form the Charter for Quality, which was essentially the blueprint for the modern academy system. If Cruyff was on his doorstep, that would have been a tremendous resource for someone like him with the project he was given to undertake. So yeah, as you said, the effect he could have had on youth development I imagine would have been huge. Yeah.
Well, a bit of luck on coach development as well. Because in that era, I did my preliminary badge in '94, I think it was, and there was like a ceiling then. There was nowhere to go after the FA preliminary badge, really, other than you being a pro, and then there was something else after that. There isn't the steps that there is, and there's too many steps for me now, but there isn't the steps that there was, that they introduced, and that I can remember that Howard. It sort of got me excited again when Howard Wilkinson did that. You're thinking, something's going to happen here. And it still took another 10 years, really, before it did. But, yeah, I think Johan would have had a huge impact on coach development and player development without any shadow of a doubt. It's been quite interesting to speculate who followed Johan at Arsenal. The man that followed the man.
It would probably depend how it all ended, wouldn't it? Whether we went out on a high or whether it had kind of gone downhill a bit as to whether they would have wanted to veer away or stay close to.
Yeah, you'd like to think. I'd like to think that Johan would probably win a few more titles than Arsene did at the start. Because he was a bit more pragmatic, wasn't he? I think than Arsene was. Me and Pete were joking about it yesterday. And today, really, about Arsene's stockpiling midfielders was the key thing. As an onlooker, you're there going, just sign some proper centre halves and another Vieira. You don't need another ball playing, inside forward, for want of a better expression.
And Cruyff certainly would have been a bigger selling point, wouldn't he, as well, for prospective transfer targets in that era than going to play for Wenger versus going to play for Johan Cruyff. Certainly for the first few years before Wenger had really kind of established himself as a force in the Premier League.
But then eventually what would happen for everyone is the Premier League itself being the lure. What I mean by the Premier League itself, I mean the money from the TV deals, which eventually enabled them to blow almost everybody away, apart from Real Madrid, Barcelona. Then certainly maybe some of it. Well, actually, around 1999-2000, the Italian teams, they had some absolutely astonishing stockpiles of players.
Yeah, the Seven Sisters, wasn't it?
Together, incredible.
Yeah, 7 teams every year who could have had a legitimate shot of winning Serie A, all the best players in the world. It was an incredible era. I'm very fond of it. It's something I think back to a lot. I'm someone who grew up in the 90s. That's kind of my jam.
Well, having recently had the news, the sad news about Sven, he had one of those super teams, the Lazio team that eventually won the title, and that's where Jaap Stam went. And you have Crespo, Veron. I think Nedved was there at the time.
Even like Claudio Lopez didn't work out for Mendieta. Guys like they spent huge money on those players. It was just Serie A was the place to be, wasn't it, for a while there?
I think it was the most poignant thing that Sven said in recent days, where he said, they were talking about him coming to England and him not being a really big success, and he said, I should have just stayed at Lazio where they thought I was a god,
and they still do.
Yeah, and it's like, wow, amazing. Very sad news that.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention, Ryan, right at the top of the show. I'm a City fan, so Sven, we still love Sven. He was great.
Yeah, he was part of the kind of he was pre Abu Dhabi, wasn't he, Sven? He was the
yes, he was Thaksin was in
that's
charge.
It, Sinawatri, that was an interesting era for City there.
they still talk about Sven in the hotels of Manchester as the best tipper of all time.
All right. I thought I was going a different direction there from it.
all the bellboys used to be right on the money. The minute Sven entered to carry his bags up the stairs.
He seems like a good guy, doesn't he? Does come
great,
well.
Yeah, obviously a good guy. Yeah, brilliant. How about that, Peter?
Yeah, well, I think the Cruyff fantasy is just it really surprised me, because before the show I had a look. I'll just see who would it be. Which of these classic English names are we going to get? I sort of remembered Venables and would have expected it. He's just finished with England. Always going to be some issues, having been a Spurs player and indeed a Chelsea player and manager at Tottenham. And I looked, and Cruyff was the bookie's favourite. I'm like, wow, that gives just a gold mine of possibilities. And we think, sure, Cruyff could have been successful and had a cultural impact comparable, but mainly on the pitch, we think, rather than off it. But he certainly wouldn't have stayed anything like as long as Arsene Wenger and built the club in the way that Wenger did.
Yeah. And I think, I guess, the reality of it as well is that, having spoken to David Dean, he said that was never, it was always Wenger. The press just didn't know who he was. So they threw out other names. But having been told he wasn't going to get his man in 95, he wasn't going to be denied in 96. So, it was always going to be Wenger. But it's fun to think about what might have been.
I have to say, if you see a chapter in Moments That Could Have Changed Football Forever, Volume 2, that is, what if Johan Cruyff took over at Arsenal, there'll be a credit at the end of it. Ryan, it's been fantastic to have you on, and it's been an absolutely brilliant chat and a pleasure. Certainly one of the ones I look forward to listening back, as we always do. But yeah, thanks so much for coming.
No, thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's been brilliant. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
What if Brian Clough had managed England?
What if Ronaldo and Messi had played together?
What if Pep Guardiola managed in League 2?
These are just some of the things discussed in a brand new book, Moments That Could Have Changed Football Forever. Every football fan has a what-if moment that they know would have brought their team glory if things had turned out differently. Every what-if moment in the book has been chosen to spark debate amongst football fans. Buy your copy now online at Amazon or Waterstones, and let us know what's your favourite what-if moment in football history.